I used to tell people that living with Lucas was easy. Too easy, actually. We shared a 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, the kind of neutral scent that made everything feel temporary, even when months slipped by unnoticed. On paper, we were perfect roommates, same schedule, same tolerance for silence, same unspoken rule about not asking questions that might complicate things. Lucas moved in first. I followed a week later, carrying my life in 3 boxes and a suitcase that wouldn't zip. He smiled when he opened the door, that effortless smile that made you feel like you'd been expected. "You'll take the room by the window," he said, as if it had already been decided. I didn't argue. I rarely did with him. We fell into a rhythm quickly. Mornings were quiet, exchanged nods and the clink of mugs. Evenings stretched longer, shared dinners, half-watched shows, conversations that wandered without direction. Lucas had a way of listening that made you forget the rest of the room. When he laughed, it felt earned, like a reward for saying the right thing. When he went quiet, I leaned into the silence instead of away from it. It was easy to mistake comfort for closeness. I did that more often than I'd like to admit. Lucas talked about his boyfriend, Ryan, the way someone talks about the weather, important, but distant. Ryan lived across town and worked odd hours, which explained his absence more than it excused it. I knew his name, his job, the way Lucas's tone softened whenever his phone buzzed with a message from him. That should have been enough to keep my thoughts in check. It wasn't. There were moments that didn't fit the "just roommates" label. Late nights when Lucas sat on the arm of my chair instead of the couch. The way he knocked on my door when he couldn't sleep, asking if I wanted to talk. How he remembered small things, how I took my tea, the song I skipped every time it came on. None of it crossed a line, at least not one you could point to and say, "There." But lines don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they wait until you're already standing on the wrong side. I told myself it was normal. This was what friendship looked like when you lived together, when you trusted someone enough to let your guard down. I ignored the quiet thrill I felt when he used my name, or the disappointment that followed whenever he mentioned Ryan with a softness he never quite used on me. Lucas was magnetic without trying. People leaned toward him, physically and otherwise. I watched it happen at parties, at the grocery store, even in our own kitchen when friends dropped by. He was generous with attention but careful with commitment. I wondered if that was why he and Ryan worked, distance as a form of balance. The apartment reflected him more than me. His books filled the shelves, his plants claimed the windowsill. My things stayed contained, as if I was still passing through. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and listen to him move around his room, the muffled sounds of drawers and footsteps reminding me that he was close but unreachable. It was a strange comfort, that proximity without access. I knew what I wasn't supposed to want. I also knew how easy it was to pretend I didn't want anything at all. The night before everything changed, nothing seemed different. Lucas cooked pasta, complained about work, checked his phone once and frowned. He didn't mention Ryan by name, and I didn't ask. We ate in front of the TV, shoulders almost touching, laughing at the same jokes. When he yawned and stretched, his elbow brushed my arm, and he didn't pull away right away. Later, alone in my room, I told myself to sleep. I told myself that comfort was harmless, that closeness didn't have to mean anything more. I believed it, or at least I wanted to. At the time, I thought the lie was protecting us both. I didn't realize it was only the beginning. The night it happened didn't announce itself as important. It arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion and unspoken tension, the kind of night that blends into memory until you realize later that it split your life in two. Lucas came home later than usual. I heard the door open, then close with more force than necessary. His footsteps were uneven, hesitant, as if he'd considered turning back before committing to the walk down the hallway. When he appeared in the living room, his jacket was still on, his hair damp from the cold air outside. He looked at me like he was searching for permission to speak. "Long day?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded and dropped onto the couch, running a hand over his face. "Ryan and I argued," he said after a pause. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. I'd learned that Lucas offered details only when he was ready, and forcing them shut him down completely. I muted the television and turned toward him. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with things he wasn't saying. Eventually, he exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, he admitted. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, stripped of the usual confidence. I listened. That was my role. I listened while he talked about distance, about feeling misunderstood, about how everything with Ryan had started to feel like an obligation instead of a choice. He never said he wanted out, but he didn't say he wanted to stay either. Each sentence felt like a step closer to a place neither of us had named. At some point, his voice trailed off. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time we weren't using. Lucas leaned back and stared at the ceiling, jaw tight, eyes glassy but dry. Without thinking, I reached out and rested my hand on his forearm. It was meant to be reassuring. Temporary. Something a good roommate would do. He didn't move away. Instead, he turned slightly, his arm shifting under my hand. The contact felt different now, intentional, acknowledged. I pulled my hand back instinctively, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Lucas noticed. I saw it in the way his eyes flicked down, then back up, as if deciding something. I just don't want to be alone tonight, he said quietly. The words landed between us, fragile and dangerous. I should have stood up. I should have offered platitudes and retreated to my room. Instead, I nodded. It felt cruel to deny him comfort when he was clearly unraveling, even if part of me knew that comfort had a cost. We moved without discussion, settling on opposite ends of the couch at first. Minutes passed. The space between us shrank naturally, like it had always been meant to disappear. When Lucas leaned into me, resting his head against my shoulder, my breath caught. His weight felt grounding, warm. I wrapped an arm around him, telling myself it was harmless, that intention mattered more than proximity. The apartment was silent except for his breathing. Slow at first, then uneven. At some point, he shifted, pulling his knees up, and I adjusted to accommodate him. We fit together too easily. That realization unsettled me more than the closeness itself. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The room darkened as the night deepened, streetlights casting long shadows across the walls. Lucas didn't sleep. Neither did I. He held onto my shirt like he was afraid I might disappear if he loosened his grip. I stared ahead, thoughts racing, heart pounding with everything I refused to say. I was acutely aware of what this meant. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the quiet, undeniable way that settles in your chest. Lucas had a boyfriend. I was his roommate. Whatever this was, this shared warmth, this unspoken dependence, it crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Just before dawn, Lucas shifted again, his forehead resting against my collarbone. "Thank you," he murmured, voice thick with exhaustion. There was no apology in it. No acknowledgement. Just gratitude. When morning light finally crept into the room, he pulled away slowly, as if waking from a dream he didn't want to examine. He stood, stretched, and offered me a tired smile. "I'm going to shower," he said, already turning down the hallway. I stayed on the couch, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. The night had changed something fundamental between us, even if only one of us was ready to admit it. And I had the sinking feeling that when he came back, he'd act like nothing had happened at all. Lucas emerged from the hallway an hour later, freshly showered and impossibly normal. His hair was still damp, his t-shirt clean, his expression settled into the easy calm he wore like armor. He poured himself coffee, hummed under his breath, and asked if I wanted toast. It was as if the night had evaporated the moment daylight touched it. I watched him move around the kitchen, each familiar gesture landing wrong. The clink of the mug against the counter felt too loud. His casualness pressed against my chest until breathing took effort. I answered him carefully, matching his tone, pretending I hadn't spent the night memorizing the rhythm of his breath. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," I said. It was true, in the loosest sense of the word. He nodded, satisfied, already turning away. That was the first cut, small, precise. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't look at me the way he had in the dark. The space between us returned, but now it felt deliberate. The day unfolded in fragments. Lucas left for work early, keys jangling, a quick goodbye tossed over his shoulder. I stayed behind, moving through the apartment like a ghost. The couch still held the impression of our bodies. I avoided it, unsure whether sitting there would make the night real or erase it entirely. My phone buzzed in the afternoon. A message from Lucas, running late. "Don't wait up." No punctuation, no warmth. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, searching for subtext that wasn't there. When he came home that evening, Ryan came with him, his voice, at least. Lucas answered the call in the kitchen, back turned, tone softened into something intimate and familiar. I caught fragments of the conversation, reassurance, a laugh, the promise of seeing each other soon. Each word tightened the knot in my stomach. He ended the call and noticed me standing in the doorway. For a split second, something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe guilt, but it disappeared before I could name it. "Hey," he said lightly. "How was your day?" I wanted to ask him how his had been. I wanted to ask if the night meant anything beyond exhaustion and poor judgment. Instead, I shrugged. Fine. We ate dinner separately, the television filling the silence neither of us addressed. Lucas checked his phone often, smiling at messages I didn't need to read to understand. I felt myself shrinking, retreating into politeness. The closeness we'd built over months now hovered between us like an accusation. Later, as we washed dishes side by side, our hands brushed. He pulled away immediately, quicker than necessary. "Sorry," he said, eyes fixed on the sink. "Right," I replied, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. That night, I lay awake listening to the apartment settle. Lucas's door was closed. The sound of his movement, once comforting, now felt like exclusion. I replayed the night before, wondering if I'd imagined the weight of his body against mine, the quiet trust in his voice. If he could erase it so easily, what did that say about me for holding onto it? The next few days followed the same pattern. Cordial conversations. Careful distance. Lucas laughed easily with friends, complained about work, mentioned Ryan without hesitation. Each mention landed harder than the last, not because of jealousy alone, but because of the certainty with which he'd chosen amnesia. I began to understand the imbalance. For Lucas, the night was an interruption, a pause in a life already mapped out. For me, it was a turning point, a truth revealed too late to ignore. He had returned to his relationship, fortified by denial. I was left with the consequences of remembering. On Friday evening, he knocked on my door. I opened it to find him leaning against the frame, hands in his pockets. "We good?" he asked, casual but watchful. The question settled heavily between us. It was an offer and a warning all at once. I could have said yes. I could have agreed to bury the night and preserve the peace. Instead, I met his gaze and realized how tired I was of pretending. "I don't think so," I said quietly. Lucas straightened, surprise flashing across his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if reconsidering his words. The hallway felt narrow, the air thick with everything we'd avoided. Whatever came next would require honesty, something we had both been careful not to use. And for the first time since that night, Lucas didn't look away. Lucas didn't step inside my room. He stayed in the hallway, as if crossing the threshold would force him to confront something he'd carefully kept contained. The light from the living room framed him in shadow, blurring the familiar lines of his face. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure of himself. "I didn't mean to make things weird," he said. His voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it, a tightness that hadn't been there before. "It's not weird," I replied. "It's just real." The word seemed to unsettle him. He shifted his weight, glanced down the hall toward his closed bedroom door, then back at me. "It was a rough night," he said slowly. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "I know," I said. "But I was." Silence followed, thick and unyielding. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect anger to look. What I felt was quieter, heavier. The exhaustion of holding something alone while the person who shared it pretended it never existed. "I don't need you to choose me," I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I just need you to stop acting like nothing happened." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, the gesture sharp and restless. "Ryan doesn't deserve to be hurt," he said. It sounded rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced in his head. "And I don't deserve to be erased," I answered. That landed. I saw it in his eyes, the brief flash of recognition, followed by something like regret. He leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. It meant something, he admitted at last. That night. But meaning doesn't always get to decide what happens next. I nodded, because I understood that too well. Wanting didn't equal choosing. Feeling didn't guarantee action. Still, the honesty eased something in me, even as it confirmed what I'd already known. "So what now?" I asked. Lucas hesitated. "Now I try to fix what I almost broke." The words were careful, deliberate. He was choosing stability. Familiarity. A life that made sense from the outside. I didn't fault him for it, not entirely. But I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. I think I should move out, I said. His head snapped up. You don't have to do that. I do, I replied. For me, the apartment had become a place of echoes, too many memories pressed into ordinary spaces. Staying would mean watching him return to normal while I remained stuck in the moment everything shifted. Leaving wasn't punishment. It was preservation. Lucas nodded slowly, acceptance settling in. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said. That doesn't change that you did. We stood there for a moment longer, neither of us reaching for the other. The intimacy that once came so easily now felt out of reach, fragile and dangerous. Eventually, Lucas stepped back, giving me space in a way he never had before. Over the next week, I packed quietly. He gave me distance, respecting a boundary that had come too late. Our conversations were polite, restrained. When Ryan came by, I made myself scarce. I didn't need to see the life Lucas was choosing. Knowing was enough. On my last night in the apartment, I sat alone in the living room, the lights low. The couch looked smaller than I remembered. Less significant. Lucas stood by the door, hands in his pockets, watching me take it all in. Take care of yourself, Ethan, he said. You too, Lucas. There was no dramatic goodbye. No final confession. Just an understanding that some connections exist only in brief, unrepeatable moments. They burn bright, then fade, not because they weren't real, but because reality couldn't hold them. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of the night he held me lift, replaced by something steadier. I carried the truth with me, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Some love never asks to be chosen. It only asks to be remembered.